All right, in the last section, we were talking about special quadrilaterals, where I told you that the figures were parallelograms, either by giving you that the opposite sides are parallel, or in the directions giving you parallelogram A, B, C, D. All right, that was section 6.2. Now we're moving on to section 6.3. And in section 6.3, you are not going to be given that they're parallelograms. You're going to have to show that they're parallelograms. So it's now going to be the converse. All right, so now it's still the same properties and everything that we did before with parallelograms, where if it's a parallelogram, then opposite angles are congruent, opposite sides are congruent. If it's a parallelogram, diagonals bisect each other. If it's a parallelogram, consecutive angles are supplementary. It's still all that. But now we're going in the other direction. Now I'm not going to give you it's a parallelogram, but I'm going to give you information on the parallelogram or on the quadrilateral. And you're going to have to determine, is there enough information for me to conclude if this is a parallelogram or not? All right, so let's go through and do, so now the first thing, it's not going to be questions yet, is it's going to be a list of all the properties. All right, so you are to pause this and you are to write this down. You're to do whatever it is that you need. Let me just move it a little bit so it's a little bit fully in the screen. But you're going to do whatever you need to do to remember these. All right, cue cards, whatever it is. Note cards, whatever you guys have to do. Write it out. Keep watching this. Whatever you need to do to memorize this, you have to. All right, or else you're not going to be able to identify and you're not going to do well in this test. All right, but the way that you can tell if it is a parallelogram, the first one is if you're given that both, or that one of the opposite sides, so in this case, segment BC and segment AD, they're opposite sides. If that pair of opposite sides are both congruent and parallel, then it guarantees that this is a parallelogram. All right, so if I give you a figure and it looks like this, and I say, all right, they're parallel and they're congruent, you can say, yes, this is a parallelogram. If I give you that both of the opposite sides are congruent, then you know it's a parallelogram. All right, so if I give you this, that AB is congruent to CD and BC is congruent to AD, then the conclusion that you can make is that this is in fact a parallelogram. If I give you that both of the opposite angles are congruent, now it must be both. If I just give you this and say this is congruent to this, that's not enough information. All right, because these two angles don't have to be congruent. All right, so I need to give you both that they're congruent. So if I give you that both of the opposite angles are congruent, then that means that this is in fact a parallelogram. All right, now here's one where a lot of people will get messed up with as well. For this one, you have to show that both of the angles are supplementary to this angle A. So both of the consecutive angles are supplementary. So a lot of people will look here, and if I give you that this is 30 and say this is 150, people will say, all right, well, these are supplementary. Well, I may say that this is 140 over here. And people will say, well, these two are supplementary, so that means it has to be a parallelogram. But since 30 plus 140 does not equal to 180 degrees, that means this is not a parallelogram. All right, so it's important that it must be supplementary to both of its consecutive angles, not just one. All right, not just one, it has to be both. Or if I give you that the diagonals bisect each other, then you know that it is a parallelogram. So if you get any of this information on your figure, or you're told this, then you can conclude that it is a parallelogram. So if I give you this, and I put an angle here, and I say this is 30 degrees, and I say solve for the measure of angle D. Well, since you know it's a parallelogram because both opposite sides are congruent, that means that opposite angles are congruent, and you can say, well, the measure of angle D is also 30 degrees. All right, so once you know it's a parallelogram, you can then apply every other trait and property that we've learned in section 2. All right, so this is just being able to determine if it is a parallelogram. So our first example, it says, what values of x and y must they be in order for ABCD to be a parallelogram? So what values will make them a parallelogram? So you look here and say, all right, well, we're given angles, and we have to decide how we can solve this problem. Now, if you really wanted to, yeah, you could try and set up and do supplementary angles, consecutive angles are supplementary, but you're going to set up a system of equations, so make it as easy as possible for you. So if you look here, we know that A and C are opposite angles. So in order for this to be a parallelogram, that means A and C have to be congruent or equal. So 3y is equal to y plus 78. So then we'll subtract over y. So 2y is equal to 78, divide by 2, and y is equal to 39. All right, so that means y has to be 39 in order for ABCD to be a parallelogram. And then we'll look at the other angles, B and D. Well, they're also opposite angles, so then we'll solve for those. So that means 3x has to be equal to 4x minus 21. We'll subtract over the 4x. So negative x is equal to negative 21. Divide each side by negative 1. So x is equal to 21. So that means y has to be 39 and x has to be 21 in order for ABCD to be a parallelogram. If there are any other values, our opposite angles are not congruent and it's not a parallelogram. All right, so the last one here that we're going to talk about is based on the information provided, can we say that this is a parallelogram? All right, so we're not going to actually do a proof for this one. We're just going to kind of talk about it. All right, so the first thing is it's clear that AB is congruent to DC. All right, so we know that AB and DC are congruent. Now, we don't know anything about the other sides, so we can't say anything about their congruent. We're only given these two angles, A and D, so we can't say both opposite angles are congruent or both consecutive angles are supplementary, so we can't do anything with that. The only thing that we know that we can prove a parallelogram is a parallelogram with only given one set of congruent sides is if those congruent sides are both congruent, if those sides are both congruent and parallel. So our goal here is, can we prove that these two sides are parallel? Well, when we highlight these two sides here in red, that we know are congruent, and then I highlight this segment here, and we can call that blue line our transversal. So now, these two lines, and this is our transversal. Well, 50 and plus 130 does equal to 180 degrees. So that guarantees that these two lines are parallel because these same side interior angles are supplementary. So now it proves that AB and B and DC are both congruent and parallel. So yes, this is a parallelogram. All right, we're not going to do a two-step proof for that one or a two-column proof. We're just talking about it. All right, and just another diagram that you guys can pause. Whatever you guys need to do. This one's a little bit shorter and a little bit more direct than the one that we went through before, but it's the same thing, just saying what you need in order to show that's a parallelogram. So you must show that both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. That's the definition. So if you can show that, then you can say it's a parallelogram. That both pairs of opposite sides are congruent, parallelogram. Prove that an angle is supplementary to both of its consecutive angles. So it's a key thing, both. It has to be both. Prove that both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. Prove that the diagonals bisect each other. And prove that one pair of opposite sides is congruent and parallel like we did in this question. All right, so any one of these and you can show it's a parallelogram. And once you show one of them, then you know every single trait and every single characteristic is there. So if we wanted to fill this in, we can say that angle B is 130 degrees. And we can say that angle C is 50 degrees. We can't solve for AD or BC because we don't have enough information for that. All right, now this problem here, you guys are going to hand in, and we're on section 6.2, 6.3.1, so it's our first video in section 6.3, and you guys are going to solve this, and it's going to be another system of equations that you guys are going to have to solve, or no, it doesn't need to be a system of equations, but you guys are going to solve this and hand this in, either by picture or you can hand it in through typing up. It will be hard for you guys to type it up, so I'd rather you guys just take a picture and submit it on your Google Drive shared document. All right, that's it for this video.